Hi, everyone. It is Sunday afternoon, and I am filming this from my dance studio because I'm in between rehearsals and just this massive day of rehearsals. So, welcome to Education 438, Teaching Reading and Writing in the Content Field, Week 13. This is going to be an overview not only of this week, but also of your inquiry projects. And we did the first step of our inquiry projects last week. You created a research question and some sub questions, and you found some resources. And this week, we're going to dive into the actual inquiry project itself. So, really excited to see how that goes for all of you and to read the results. So, as always, this video will be a recap of week 12. It will then move into our topics for week 13, as well as our learning objectives for week 13. We'll then move to some essential questions that I want you to think about while you're doing your reading. And then I'm going to dive into, like I said, a pretty hopefully detailed enough overview of our inquiry project assignment. And then I will end with some reminders. So let's just jump right in. Last week, we started talking about writing instruction across the content areas. We did a lot of reading, and you got some information on the Hockman method and the six writing revolution principles of writing instruction. We learned why sentence instruction is so important in building foundational writing skills. You hopefully examined and maybe put some sentence expansion activities in your toolbox. These help students understand, process, write about new info and complex content. We learned about the importance of note taking, right? Explicitly instructing note taking, and once again, note taking as that foundational skill. We understood the CCSS anchor standards for writing. Hopefully, you already had a pretty good sense of those, but maybe last week allowed you to dig in a little bit more. And then, of course, I really hope that my Zoom walkthrough of creating my own research questions and sub questions helped you to think about how to create your inquiry project questions and how to identify reliable resources. So, I'm going to keep my takeaways pretty short today. But my big takeaway from last week was this notion of teaching writing is teaching thinking. I love that. So, the authors of the Writing Revolution mentioned that when writing is done explicitly, when it's done systematically, when it's done in a sequenced way, teaching these skills helps us teach students how to think. And really, writing is kind of how I make sense of my own thinking. It clarifies my content knowledge on a topic. It allows me to think about what I think about a topic. And I know that this is true for a lot of students as well. So I love this connection between teaching effective writing and teaching critical thinking. Since I'm here at my dance studio, I'm going to use dance as I guess, a sort of a baseline for me to talk about my next big takeaway. So, this whole semester, but really this last week, we've been talking a lot about the importance of foundational skills when it comes to writing. And the same is true for dance, right? I recommend that all of my students take a class that is actually a level beneath their current level. And that's because I want them to continue practicing foundational skills. And it's something that we want to do with our writers, right? With our student writers is practicing sentence structure, going over parts of speech, these things that maybe seem basic. Sure, they might be basic, but they're so important, and they're so important to continue to stress to our students. Once again, the importance of modeling. This is something that I keep taking away from our readings and our conversations. And modeling in the sense of actually practicing modeling an activity out loud for students so they can see your process and actually hear you think through it. And then my last big takeaway, teachers should be writers. I love this, right? We are teaching students how to become expert writers in our content fields. So we should always be striving to be expert writers in our content fields. And writing, of course, is a process and will always be getting better and better and better. But I love this notion of writing alongside students, always trying to increase our writing skills in our content areas with our students. All right, so week 13, we're going to keep talking about writing. And this week, we're really going to hone in on the importance of planning when we write. We're going to talk about writer purpose and the Writing Revolution's three types of writing, outlining and drafting the single paragraph, modeling, scaffolding, and differentiating the single paragraph outline, the SPO, as our writers call it. And then, of course, crafting inquiry projects. So our learning objectives, of course, correspond with those topics. Students will consider the importance of planning and writing effective paragraphs and compositions through reading chapter 5 of the Writing Revolution. I really appreciated this chapter. I was a writer back in my middle school, high school years that did not really plan. I would wait till the last minute and sit in front of my computer and just bang out a paper. And I realized not until college, and I wish it had been sooner, I realized how important planning is in the writing process. Students will understand the importance of outlining and drafting paragraphs before asking students to do larger, longer scale writing assignments. Once again, foundational skills are key, and learning how to outline and draft a single paragraph is so important. Students will examine the single paragraph outline format, considering how to model, scaffold, and differentiate the process of creating that outline format with and for their students. And you all are going to engage in inquiry projects through analyzing your chosen resources in relation to your research questions and sub-questions. So, as always, I love to give you some essential questions to think about as we dive into our reading this week. So, how does having a coherent plan for writing enhance confidence, reduce stress, and increase creativity? I thought that was interesting, right? I used to, once again, in high school, kind of I consider myself a creative writer, right? So I was like, I don't need to craft an outline. I don't need to plan. And I was wrong. It actually helps me, especially now that I create a lot of original content, both in terms of journal articles and in terms of narratives for my dance troupe. It always helps me to plan. And it reduces my stress. What do student writers need to know and understand before writing a paragraph or longer composition? Why is it important to ask students to write for different audiences and different purposes? We're getting really into rhetoric here, but it's so important. Is teaching students to outline and draft a single paragraph a crucial investment of time? We're so limited in terms of time as teachers. We have so much that we have to teach in any given year. And I've had teachers before tell me, well, I don't really have the time to reteach how to write a single paragraph. I promise it is worth the time. It really is. How might the single paragraph outline benefit all students? Why is it important to engage in modeling and scaffolding activities that will help kind of get students to that single paragraph before asking them to complete one on their own? And then for us, this is something to think about in relation to our inquiry project. In what ways is inquiry cyclical? In the sense that every time I have a question and I do research on it, maybe I answer that question, but I always come away with so many more questions. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here, something for you to think about. So before I head into explaining our assignment for this week, I want to mention that there's no required Zoom for this week, but I am going to be holding office hours this Wednesday from 5 to 5:45 for anyone who wants extra support with their inquiry projects. Those, of course, are due this coming Sunday, November 16th by 11:59 p.m. All right, I am going to exit out of this and I'm going to pop over first to our reading assignments for this week. So I'm going to skip over topics, objectives, I just went over them. This video will appear here. So if you look at our required reading and our optional reading, if you were really into sentences, you liked the readings that we did on sentences last week, there is an optional chapter you can continue with in the Writing Revolution, which teaches you how to teach students how to vary their sentences and how to increase sentence complexity. So that's optional, but I actually find it's a really, useful chapter. So if you have the time and the interest, dive in. Our two required chapters for this week are 5 and 6, the chapter on planning before writing and the chapter on the simple linear guide to single paragraph outlines. Then, of course, the most important thing, which is up here on top in the red, is for you to read the 2 to 3 articles or chapters you chose as resources for your inquiry project. I know a lot of you have already dived into reading those. So if you haven't, that is priority number 1 for this week. The link to my office hours is here for this week if you need it. Once again, your inquiry projects are due this Sunday. And then if you are curious, here are the chapters in the Writing Revolution that we're moving on to next week. All right. Last stop for this video is to dive into the assignment description and your requirements for your inquiry projects. Okay. So last week, I asked you to formulate an overarching question and sub-questions that you have regarding the teaching of reading, writing, multiliteracies, really anything we've talked about this semester. I asked you to think about this in relationship to the particular grade level and content that you either are teaching or will be teaching. I asked you to choose 2 to 3 accredited journal articles or chapters outside of our course readings that addressed your questions or hopefully addressed your questions. So this week, we're actually going to jump into that project, okay? So you're going to read your chosen journal articles and chapters. You're going to write up your findings in a report that demonstrates a clear analysis of those articles, relates what you learn to your inquiry and to your future teaching practice, and that follows APA guidelines. There's a million APA guidelines out there, but if you need help, happy to do it. So you can choose the medium your report will take. You might choose to do a PowerPoint or a Google slide. You might choose to do this just as a Word doc, a PDF, etc. And you're going to turn these in Sunday the 16th, but the last 5 points for this actually comes from presenting these out at our next required Zoom meeting on the 19th. Okay, so there's really kind of 3 steps to this project. We did 1 step this past week. We're doing the project itself this week, and then we're presenting on the 19th. So here is what your report, okay, your project needs to have. And I've tried to be as specific as I can with this, but if you have any questions, come to Zoom office hours or reach out. So first thing it has to have is an introduction of some sort that explains how and why you came up with the question that you did, how it relates to the instruction of reading, writing, multiliteracies, or anything else we've talked about this semester. And for me personally, this is so important, why this question is essential to your teaching practice, right? Why do you care? Why are you invested in this? How might it inform your teaching? So that's 3 points. Then you're going to include your research question and your sub-questions that stem from that research question. I will have all these back to you by the end of the day on Monday if you've turned them in on time. So if I've asked you to revise anything, please make sure that you do that in this section, in section 2, okay? So 3 points for that research question, those sub-questions revised if you needed to revise them. Here is where the bulk of your time is going to be spent, right? I want you to analyze each accredited journal article, okay, that you chose. So give me a brief overview, all right? What's it about, right? But more importantly, situate it in relationship to your question. Did it answer your question? Does it give you any information on that question or sub-questions? Does it inform how you're thinking about your future teaching practice? So really, for each journal article, you're giving me a brief overview, but more importantly, you're analyzing it, right? You're situating that article or that chapter in relationship to your question and sub-questions, and in relation to how you're thinking about your future teaching practice. So don't feel like you need to spend a ton of time summarizing what the article's about. Give me a brief overview because I don't have time to read, I don't know, it would be like 60 articles, but I am curious about what it's about. But more importantly, I want to know how it answers or relates to your research question and sub-questions and your teaching, okay? So if you did 2 articles, I'd expect to see 2 here. If you did 3, I'd expect to see 3 kind of analyses here. Please make sure that you include some direct evidence, and when you do, cite it in proper APA. All right, finally, I want you to just kind of nod to future research or investigation that you would like to do after reading and analyzing your resources, okay? What new questions are coming up? What questions do you still have? What might you want to investigate further? That's 2 points. And then finally, your reference page or list, please put this in APA format. You notice that this is 20 points possible. Your presentations that will stem from this in our next required Zoom are 5 points. So this whole thing is 25 points. Your suggested length and formatting requirements. This is hard for me to answer because this kind of depends on the medium you choose, right? So if you're doing a PowerPoint or a Google slide, you might have a slide for the intro, a slide for your research question and sub-questions, a slide for each of your resources, a slide for further research and investigation, and a slide for your references. Okay. If you do this as a Google Doc, it might be more in paragraph format, and that's fine. But if you're like, I don't know how long this needs to be, you all know I'm an open book. Please reach out. Please ask me. Okay. And then, of course, here's your rubric if you want to take a look at that. So that is that in terms of my overview of inquiry projects. I'm going to stop sharing my video. I am so excited. Y'all know I'm a nerd. I love research. So excited to see kind of where you go with these projects this week. Please come to office hours if you have questions. And if you can't come to office hours, shoot me an email. Okay. Sorry that I talked so fast in this video. I think I'm on my third Celsius of the day, and I'm about to head into a 3-hour dance rehearsal. So wish me luck, and I will see you all soon. And I hope you have a great week and happy inquiry.